Hey folks, it's Jamie Lindell here, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit today about how I go about finishing my mono steel blades. So probably the biggest component in that is, and the biggest difference in the way that I finish as opposed to the way that Matt finishes his blades, is I have a piece, as opposed to a small block, I have a piece of wood here that I've cut out with a couple of handles that allows me to get like a lot of pressure on the piece that I'm sanding. And really the thing that allows you to remove more material is, one, the grit that you have, and two, how much pressure you're applying. The amount of pressure that you can apply is, will greatly change the amount of material that you can remove as you go through. So with the handles here, I can really get above a piece and really get a lot of pressure onto it in order to flatten things out, remove materials, and make things nice and smooth. So I use basically my block here. I have this set up to be about 3 inches. You can tear up your sandpaper into 3-inch chunks, or even better is if you have a paper cutter. You can pick one up for not all that much money and then just cut everything into slices with that. You can cut several pieces at a time. It really ends up saving a whole lot of time. So that's one thing that I would definitely recommend going out. It's worth the 20 bucks or whatever it's going to be at Staples to pick one up. So that all being said, what I'll do is I'll just get my paper on here. I'll roll up my excess, and then just use a spring clamp to hold that down. I mean, this whole setup doesn't cost you very much money. It's about $1 for a spring clamp at Harbor Freight or Home Depot or whatever. And then you just use a scrap piece of wood that you cut out and shape a little bit so it's not sharp corners. Anyways, at this point, my piece that I'm working on here, I basically have a piece of angle iron that I have clamped into my vise, and on top of that I have a piece of leather in order to keep things protected. And I just place my blade down there. I have some vice grips in order to hold it down, and then the other thing is I have a little bit of a little wedge, and I can use that in case when I clamp down on my tang, the end of my knife comes up. You want to make sure as much of that knife is in contact with the angle iron or whatever you're using to support as possible, and that way you're not getting deflection into the blade, right? So you can use that to set up here, clamp this down, and I like keeping the edge off the side of the angle iron. That way I can extend past the edge and I'm not running into the part that I'm clamped down to, and that's not interfering at all with the way that I can polish. Important thing to keep in mind as you're doing this is you want to make sure that you're very aware of the tip of your blade, because it's quite easy to accidentally catch a finger on there and then all of a sudden you're bleeding all over the place, and that's no good for anyone. So always keep an eye on that. In fact, you can, if you're concerned about it, you can make sure that that tip always stays on top of the material, or the angle iron that you're sanding on, and that way there's no way to catch it. And if you use the wedge, you can angle things up so that the tip is always in contact, and so you never have to worry about that. But I'll figure I'll just give you we'll show a quick clip of just going through a couple of different grits. I try to go up to like 120 or so on the machine. You can go higher than that certainly, but I find that 120 works pretty well. So we'll do a little bit of sanding. Alright, well, you can see that I have the majority of the lines from the grinder going off on kind of like a 40-degree angle here, so I'm going to make sure that as I go after this I'm cutting across it. Right now what I'm using is 220 grit paper, And I find that's a pretty decent place to start, as long as you don't have huge, deep scratches that you need to take out. And really all you end up looking for is to make sure that you get all the scratches going in the same direction, and then you can change direction. For a lot of these, what I'll do is I'll just bring it up to 400 grit by hand, and then go over it with WD-40 and a piece of medium Scotch-Brite, my red Scotch-Brite. But this really allows me to, and the nice thing about this setup here is that once you stop cutting super fast, you can then just rotate to your next spot and clamp down. Makes it really easy to cycle through. And we're just going to keep going through this. We're going to fast forward a little bit here, but we're going to keep going through this until we get all the lines going in the same direction, and then we're going to come back with 400 grit and go lengthwise with that. So, going to do a little bit of work, and we'll come back when I get all my lines in the right direction. Alright, so we kind of fast forwarded a little bit here. Took me a little bit, but now I have all of my lines going off on this 45-degree angle with a 220 grit. And so what I'm going to do now is I've attached my 400 grit to my sanding block, and now I'm just going to go lengthwise until I get out all of the scratches that I have previously put in. And when I do this, what I like to do is I'll do the 220 grit on one side, and then I'll do the 400 grit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a piece of blue tape over. And so when I flip it, if there's any movement, if this shifts back and forth at all, I'm not, any of the grit that ends up on my leather won't be able to put in any sort of scratches on the side that I've just finished up. So that's a good little tip, is that, make sure that when you flip it, because I don't flip it back and forth do both sides in 220 and then 400 on one side and 400 on the other. I do 220, 400, tape it, flip it, 220, 400. So once I get this side done, I'll then show you my final bit on how I get my final finish on my mono steel blades. Alright, so now I think that I have all of my, well, not quite. Generally the way that this goes is that you feel like you got everything, and then you gotta look at it in different angles, different lights, and I can see a couple of more spots here that I need to get with the 400 grit. So it's always important to, even when you think you're done, take the piece, either change the angle that you're looking at it, take it off of the piece that you are sanding on, and inspect it at different angles with different lighting. And that often will bring to light some of those spots that are, almost there, but not quite, marks aren't quite taken out. So once you get to this point where things are looking good, what I like to do is, I'm sure that this is a thing that Matt went over, is drawing your lines. So you just go the whole length, not switching direction, going back and forth, because that gives you these little J hooks, these little curls in your finish, and you want to make sure that you smooth all those out. And so once You get all these lines going in the same direction. What you want to do at that point, the finish that I like to leave on my blade, monosteel blades, is from here. I'll throw a little bit of WD-40, and then with a medium Scotch-Brite, I again pull those lines, and this really gives a nice satin finish. I know there's plenty of smiths out there that go with a much higher polish, and it's kind of each to their own. The important part is that you have a consistent polish, you know, that looks good. And I find that this kind of medium grit polish done with the Scotch-Brite to kind of give it a nice matte finish as opposed to the high gloss finish, ends up looking really good. So you can see, and give it a quick wipe down. Gives a really nice directional matte finish. Well, I hope that this tutorial was helpful for you guys. If there's anything more about finishing that you are interested in learning and that I can help you with, please feel free to leave a message in the comments about what kind of things you'd like to see from me. I know that someone had brought up wolf tooth patterns, and I will be getting to those in the next couple weeks. I just have a bunch of other stuff going on right now, and we're gonna get to probably the just technical part of it as opposed to the actual execution, and then we'll do another video after that with the execution. So anyways, I hope this is helpful, and leave comments on the things that you would like to see.